This is Trump's appeal court.
Wow, gee, I wonder if they could be biased.
Here's another picture of them. So here's the thing.
Of course.
Everyone was saying this case with Trump is so horrendously biased and has been so poorly run that any appeals court would overturn it. Well, not any.
No, because he's going to go to another New York appeals court, which is going to look just like this.
Yeah, and they've already set this up, which is again, that's a setback, but it's fine because ultimately there is a higher court that he can appeal to. What our enemy is hoping to do is to do all the damage before the election. Funnily enough, the sentencing date is a few days before the RNC, the convention.
It's just very curious.
Coincidence. Yeah, so that's their strategy. I think they want him in prison if they can get it, but they're happy to just frustrate him and put him in legal limbo for the entire time. So there's always a question as to whether he can run and to set up the rhinos, the high up in the party, which, by the way, rhinos aren't really leading the GOP anymore, but there are a lot of them in positions of power. To be able to have leverage to say we shouldn't allow him to run because he's a felon. He can't be elected. And the argument will be just to frustrate their opponents. It's just another tactic to try and give them a few more votes to try and make it a bit more plausible that their rigging is true. This is part of that. It won't actually stand, I don't think, but it will stand a little longer because, I don't think these people are going to overturn the horrendous trial, even if one or two of them might actually be intelligent enough to know it's a problem. Their activist brains will kick in first. And why am I saying that? Is it because they're black? Well, it's
because they're women.
it's correlative, but it's also because they're women, yes.
No, I'll say it. It's not because they're black. It's because they're women.
And it's New York as well.
They might be. They are women, and that. Look, I'm serious about that. It's because they're women, and women should not be in positions of power. Because look what they do. Because I'm saying this as a woman. We do things based on emotions. Yes, we are capable occasionally of logic and reason, but come the fuck on. Do you think these women did anything? I don't even care about their race. I don't. I genuinely don't. It's because they're like, this is my feeling about Donald Trump, and they don't give a shit. I don't. Man, I'm becoming more sexist every day. I can't help it. Not even racist, just sexist.
Matthias has actually has linked to something which is rather interesting. I didn't know this. There have been two presidential candidates, one in 1920 and one in 1992, that ran from prison, or from jail, at least it says.
Yes, it has happened before, yes.
They didn't win, but there is precedent that they are allowed to run.
No, but this is Donald Trump, come on.
Yeah, that's precedent that nothing in the Constitution will stop them, but will someone try to around to make it happen? And will the people in the RNC still decide that tactically it's better not to? That's what their enemy is hoping for.
Tactically, absolutely is not a good idea to support anyone but Donald Trump as the RNC candidate.
Yeah, that's correct. Insane. I was going to say, if it was any other candidate, if it were an unknown, then him running from prison would be a massive downside. With Trump, it's different. With a lot of things, it's different.
It's the same thing that they did before, where like they accidentally, because they don't understand this, that they have. This is why I get so confused by it, because psychologically, the same people who are advising them have to also understand, advising them from the cognitive dissonance kind of aspect, have to also understand the psychological reactance aspect, which is that you tell people you cannot do this thing. They will want to do that thing. And one of the things that's very funny is that, much like in 2016, interestingly enough, they have like procked the black voters by making Trump a criminal.
Someone was saying that in chat,
I don't think they meant to do that, and I think a lot of it is a joke. But it's like there's all these black guys on Twitter being like, "Yo, my N-word Trump. I'm up for my N-word Trump. I'm here for him. He's being attacked. You know, the government coming after him." And it's like,
well, as someone in chat points out, 13% of the population are black. Half of that is almost exactly the 6-point bump he got last night.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like, people can associate with him more, but silly. But
silly, but still,
there'll be some truth to it. But there's what was it? Yes, the people advising them, as you said, to avoid certain things. Yeah, maybe they are, but it may indicate that whilst our opponent is powerful, even at the highest level, they're facing issues with competency and issues with flexibility, agility.
I think more accurately, what the problem is that the people who are advising them do know what they're talking about, right? These are people who have very advanced knowledge of human psychology and how to manipulate it.
But not necessarily of modern day differences with their research.
No, I think they do. And I'm speaking as someone who has, again, my original background in psychology research was in persuasion theory and persuasion work. They know what they're talking about. The problem is, though, is that persuasion is so complicated because the human brain is so complicated. And so you have multiple factors that are actually contradictory and conflicting with each other working at the same time. If you're going to work on any vector, you have to work on one vector. You can't work on all vectors. And unfortunately, like, them trying to go after Trump like this is provoking a reactance-like effect while they're also trying to engage in cognitive dissonance provocation. You can't do both at the same time. You got to pick a lane, and they can't. They're just attacking him on all levels. And yes, those levels, every single one of those can work to psychologically manipulate people, but all at the same time, it becomes too much, I think. Too confusing to the voter. They don't know what to do. I think they're just hoping that it's spray and pray, I think.
I think it is. I was about to say, I think our opponent, if you imagine our opponent as just a slathering beast, but within the context of using deception instead of violence, that's what our opponent is. There is no limit to the horrors they are willing to unleash, but they are also smart enough to do it tactically. That is not, by the way, a because you and I have talked about before how the universe appears to filter for increasing complexity or increasing usability or function or something like that. It is actually a positive universe or a generative universe, you could say, a creative universe. That formula of the slathering beast who uses deception rather than violence, just like the slathering beast itself, is not actually one of those positive or creative processes. It has to be arbitrarily created. It has to be formed out of pure lust of power, out of pure deliberation. The natural processes that converge towards benefit are those which oppose that beast, which is our processes, which is why we shouldn't try and become beasts ourselves. We should continue as we are. Our opponent, to what you said earlier, Aidan, about the opportunities our opponents have to defame us, it's much harder for our opponent to do that if we act so well that they can only convince their acolytes of our evil. Which is why again, like Jan 6th, they had a lot of trouble, but it was still a really good opportunity for them, and they were able to make a lot of hay from it. But they would have made a lot of
headway with that. Yeah.
They would have been able to make a lot more headway if we were actually being overtly violent beyond the relatively isolated and relatively explicable violence that there was on that day. If we act well, if we don't initiate force, and even if we do it defensively, they can use it. But as long as it's that is still more explicable, more excusable. As long as we act well, we will eventually win. So it's about patience. It's about being able to outlast your opponent, trying to make you as evil as they are. Because if we become as evil as they are, that will be the collapse of our society. Just like the fascists and socialists fighting on the streets before Hitler. That was a society in collapse. The only reason it didn't collapse is because of Hitler, but that had other problems. If we continue like this, we can actually heal our society. All we have to do is maintain our patience to outlast them and not lose who we are. Make sure that we're still good people. Continue with the indirect, and we can actually win. Maybe no other time in history has it been so effective to do that as it is today. Which is why it's hard to judge from history on these matters, which is why it's hard to apply rigorous realpolitik to the effects of today. But I think we actually can do that. Maybe the first time in history.
I don't think it's the first time in history, but
no, not exactly.
I couldn't say
in some ways it is novel. In many ways it's not. Yes.
Yes. Well, certainly with the impact of media, and mass media in particular, has completely changed the landscape in every way because of how it. I know that people think that, you overestimate the effect of mass media. No. I'm doing that for a very specific reason because I'm a mass media. I know. Okay, yeah, because I'm a mass media expert. Like yes, I look at that and I see the effect that it has, but it cannot be overestimated. That mass media affects the way that people see stuff, and I don't mean I actually mean the traditional media as well as new media. This stuff has totally changed the way that people perceive things and can very much change opinions. However, I think what you said is completely correct. That what people did on January 6th that was portrayed via the mass media as being 9/11 too.
Imagine if they'd set fire to the building. Imagine how much worse it would be if they'd set fire. Just for example.
They didn't do anything.
Imagine how much worse it would be.
Someone took a shit allegedly on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Who gives a damn? But it is about creating the perception in people's brains, and I think they've done an okay job of that. But it is more difficult to do it now with the mass media environment being what it is, with the existence of things like Twitter and well, the internet in general. It's far harder for them to do that. There's an old theory of mass media that's been debunked called inoculation theory, the hypodermic needle effect. Inoculation theory is real. The hypodermic needle effect. You can understand why I confuse the terms.
Fair enough, yes.
Hypodermic needle theory has been abandoned for about 70 years for good reason. What hypodermic needle theory predicted in the 1940s, etc., was in that time span, was that the media injected people with beliefs. That's been completely debunked. There's not been a single piece of research over the course of 70 years that has ever been able to support hypodermic needle theory. That's why it's been debunked. However, what media does is it moves people into certain directions, particularly because it often tends to move them into echo chambers. And once they get involved in an echo chamber, then it gets harder for them to hear things that are outside of their perspective, and therefore that inculcates them into a certain ideology. Yes, it's propaganda. But I think they totally fucked this up. They failed. They fucked up on that Jan 6 stuff because it was insane. It was like people waving flags is somehow people who, and then we had to all see the police also just having people walk into the Capitol building. I don't think that was good propaganda, and I do hope that you're right, that it is the case that people are changing, that they are able to perceive these things and make decisions and make alterations to their behavior. My fear, however, is that cognitive dissonance stuff is going to come in and make it so that it's like, nope, Trump is evil. Even though I saw that, even though I've seen how incredibly outrageously aggressive they've been towards Trump, how biased like these 5 black women are towards him, that it will not be able to beat cognitive dissonance.
Understand. And I understand why you think so as well. I think we've already seen enough to think that it's not strong enough to have that effect. It will slow things down as it has been, but I don't think it'll win. As CotCon in chat says, they failed because it didn't have a monopoly on what people could see and read. Our opponent's strategy in our societies requires them to have such immense control of everything, of almost everything, of so many of the pillars of our societies. And even then it takes them decades to win. All it takes is for the alternative, for the process of meritocracy, still alive even under their regime that has tried to squeeze it out, to provide alternatives. We provided alternative politicians, provided alternative media sources. Hello. Provide alternative ideas, provide alternative communities. And that's all it takes. I think this is just society renewing itself. Society before was vulnerable to this kind of attack. And now, because our society is adaptive enough and not too singular in its point of failure, it can adapt to this. And now everything that we're doing is in response to this regime, which required the form of society it was before. And so I really think that's a very strong example of what you were calling inoculation theory, Aidan. But on an entirely societal level, this is how you get renewal, because they're attacking the weakest aspects of our society, and they are falling obsolete as a result. Those exact aspects, we're replacing them. This is
very much it terrifies them. That's why they have to denigrate, demonize.
This is the process. Yeah, this is a process by which a heavily evolved population adapts to a changing environment. And our opponent were very smart, very devious, but that even they can't fight that on a large enough scale. They just made just enough small mistakes that the cracks began to widen, and now it's unstoppable.
It's exactly why they had to deplatform people like yourself, right? Because you cannot have that, because they knew even then, despite all of their many, many flaws, because again, our opponent is not as intelligent as they think they are, despite all of their academic accolades and bona fides and all the people who are advising them. They still make many, many errors by not, because they can't, despite thinking that they're playing 5D chess, they're actually not, because you're still just a bunch of human beings capable of making errors. And one of the errors that they made, very significant errors, was in trying to deplatform anyone who disagreed with them. It actually would have been in their benefit, and if I were some kind of Democrat strategist, I would have told them this: do not deplatform these people, because if you deplatform them, then you make it harder for you to use the things these people are saying and then make up lies about them, and etc. And say, oh well, Lo is a bad person. When you hide them, that makes it easier actually for them to not be able to do such things.
It gives them casus belli. It makes them aware of who the enemy is immediately, and it creates a strong underground contingent who will take power away from exactly the sources of information distribution that you need to continue to control as a unanimous source of all information. By creating this separate class, yes, they gave themselves total power over those platforms, but they also made those platforms less relevant.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one of those small mistakes that caused a small crack, which has grown since then.
I don't think it's actually a small mistake. I think it's actually a huge one. But longitudinally, by deplatforming, because it's not just that it makes it so that we can't control this and this is outside of us, but because of psychological reactions, because of just the natural human proclivity to want to be part of in groups or out groups, you're so cool. You made them cool. They made you cool, Uzalu, by inherently, kicking you out of the club.
I think I was already cool, lady. I didn't need that.
No, you didn't. But they didn't anticipate that shit, which is so funny to me. They absolutely did not anticipate that.
Corn is right. I believe that's what happened to Parler. Parler looked very much like it was suddenly successful and then immediately sabotaged. I think that when they did that, they had no conception that Elon would one day buy Twitter, which was basically that's why I think they don't like that Elon bought Twitter, because of what they did to Parler. They desperately needed that control. And since Elon bought Twitter, I'm not sure exactly what the reaction was or how they internally strategized it, but I imagine there was some hair on fire in some of those.
The only thing I've noticed since Elon
deep state
bought
meetings.
Twitter is that you can say whatever you want and my feed is full of porn. But okay, thanks, Elon. I at least am thankful for the former.
Elon has made several changes to the site. Most of them have been good, with a few that I think have had bad results, but most of them have been good, and Twitter is now a much better place for free expression than it was before. So he has generally helped a lot. In fact, he may be the person that has helped the second most to win the culture war behind Trump.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I'd agree.